Can you hear the rain? It's raining so hard now. That's good.
Oh, that is good.
We get the ambience.
Yeah.
But they don't get the audio.
Okay, and I think we are live. I'm just making sure. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome back to Fort Vancouver Regional Library's third and final live event with the Goldendale Community Library's partner artist of the Exquisite Gorge Project II, Fiber Arts, with Carolyn Hazel Drake. Yay! Now, if you missed the first two events, I'll add the direct links into the chat, and I'll also add the link to the Maryhill Museum of Art's page on the Exquisite Gorge Project II, Fiber Arts, which is the reason why we're here. So with that, I'll take it away. Welcome, Carolyn. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Tara. It's great to be back. I brought with me a special guest today. This is my daughter, Sylvia Dresselhaus. Would you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Sylvia Eden, and I write, illustrate, and publish books about witchcraft, folk magic, and landscape-centered spirituality.
And she also, as I was just discussing with Tara, has been really a pinch hitter of a studio assistant, both for me and for my mom. So we really rely on her for critical feedback and also like a lot of help in the studio. So I lured her to here today because I thought that the topic that she would find really interesting and that would be a good one to talk about is the relationship between art making and the natural world, which is something that is part of both of our creative practices. But before we jump into that, you know, I gotta have an outline. So wanted to start by just reintroducing the project in case you happen to miss the first two live stream. And then there are kind of four things I wanted to touch on today. One is a residency that I did at the Southwester, which is right by Astoria, and how being in that space kind of informed this project. The second is how the structure of my design has evolved since the last conversation that we had. The third is talking a little bit about how I plan on integrating some ceramics into the finished piece. And then the fourth topic is that idea about making art in response to nature, or even more like embedding experiences in the natural world with creative process. So with that, in March, I had the good fortune of being a part of the Southwester Arts Week for the second year. It's an amazing event, and the Southwester is a lodge and then some really wonderful vintage trailers that have been fixed up. So it's kind of a compound. And every year in March, they bring out, it's like about 30 artists and musicians to have a week of just art making and then sharing in art making. And so I had brought with me, if you remember the last time we spoke, I was really trying to figure out how am I going to land in terms of integrating weaving versus integrating quilting and applique. And so I ended up doing a lot of little studies on a brand new tiny travel loom that I got. And I took them out onto the coast. So you can see on one side, there's the woven piece, and then on the other side is the applique piece. And so with those two, I was really thinking about like the way that the water meets the land and thinking about that view kind of from above and the opposing forces of like the immovable land and then the power of the water coming in. Here's another one. I've called these lovers. They're sets of lovers that were together. I photographed them out on the beach, which you can see on my Instagram. But just thinking about the idea of the power of the force of the water and the idea of the current and being right in the mouth of the Columbia in Astoria, driving back and forth across that marvelous and terrifying bridge several times during my stay. And ultimately landed on that I really wanted to focus mostly on applique and quilting to get that kind of like crisp rendering of space and contrast at this very small scale. So that I was also thinking about, you know, with the current of the Columbia River and the power of it kind of going out to the ocean, and then also like the idea of the salmon that come back up the river every year and the power of the desire to return home as like a point of tension between like kind of the power of your life and then the idea of like your desire to always be returning home. So that was kind of my takeaway from that experience, and that brought me home to begin really finalizing my design. Now, drawing is not like a really central part of my practice, which is very different from my daughter, who's an insane drawer, an insane illustrator. You'll see some of her pieces in a little bit. But what I kind of came up with is this idea of having these segments that would be appliqued and quilted with a kind of skeletal structure that separates each of the sections, and then those are suspended and kind of undulating through the frame, and then attached by cords along the sides of the top and the bottom of the frame. So you may remember my color palette that I had landed on for the wools, and I really stuck with that color palette. This piece I showed last time, it was still in process, and now it's complete. And the color palette here too, like these very kind of sandy creamy colors, and then the little glints of blue also kind of came forward. And so I have one of the segments to show you now. And you can see that it's got this like gradient of kind of mid-tone to lighter tone. These are Daiwabo yarn dyed cottons from Japan that are in the background. And they're just real, I mean, the screen doesn't do it justice, which is why we're gonna have to come see it in person. And then on top of that is this flying geese pattern, which is a traditional quilting pattern that, and of course, geese are also, you know, drawn by the seasons to fly north and south. So there's like the power, so the flying geese pattern will run downwards, like like the current of the Columbia River, and then there will be these brightly colored triangles that'll be going the opposite direction. And my hope is that as that happens across each of the planes, that it will create these glints that kind of look like the way that the light glints on the surface of the river, as well as capture that sense of the movement back up the current that the salmon take. But it's really more than, it's less about like the salmon specifically and more about the idea of pushing against the current, driven by like a deep desire for something. And then these are my dowels. So these will be at either end of each segment. And then at the end of these dowels, this is how, next thing I was going to talk about is how to integrate ceramics. So first I played around with, I thought maybe I wanted to have these dowels be made out of clay, out of porcelain. And so again, working at the smaller scale, the study, I was making these little skinny guys that are porcelain and that have these really simple patterns on them. And I loved the way that they felt like bone, but I felt that ultimately I wanted them to be able to be this, not much thicker than this. And for the width that they would need to be, that I was kind of introducing a level of risk with them breaking. And that's probably not worth the risk in this case. So instead of going this route, I'm going to be using, so these are actually made of bone. So this was like my inspiration. It also has that quality of the skeletal system. And you can see how this is actually on a much smaller scale, kind of the same idea of the structure as this, where it's these segments that are linked together. So I like the way that those are connected. And here's an example of one of the sets. You can see the tiny little dots on them. Actually, they really matched my manicure, which was not on purpose, but is pretty funny. So that's a possible route. Or I also have these are unfired, so they're still raw, that are almost maybe a little too literal, like they're very kind of spine-like. And so I'm thinking that they might be a little bit too literal.
They're cool shapes though.
Yeah. So that was a lot of things that I said. And before we move on to art in response to nature, are there any questions from the audience, Tara, that have come up?
Not yet, except Jennifer and Hugo say they are here from the Netherlands. And Betty Anderson says, hi, family.
I like that these events are just basically like a family reunion.
Yeah, that's nice.
So
It's really nice.
Yeah. So I guess there's one more thing I'll say about this. So each of the segments will have a gradient. So like I said, this is from light to mid-tone. So then the one next to this will have like a mid-tone to dark gradient. And then the next one would be a dark to mid-tone and then mid-tone to light. So that the background of this river design has a light to dark flow to it. And then also on top of it, these are, you can't quite see, but this is hand-dyed wool, and it's just like really gorgeous. So those two from piece to piece will change in their value from darker to lighter, but they'll stay muted so that just these bits of bright. Here's a few of the other kind of colors of blue, and I might move into, like, I have some greener, not the gold, but I have some greener and grayer blues also. And that part is really fun to play around with. So kind of my next thing to really focus on is making all of the rest of the individual pieces, and then really landing on the suspension system with the dowels. What I like about the suspension system is that it is like it's forgiving and adjustable on site. So it will be very easy to deinstall and then reassemble, both when it's first assembled at the library and then the second time it's assembled at the Maryhill Museum. So I'm hoping that that makes it like less stressful and also can really respond to the environment where it gets installed in terms of like how much undulation there is in that shape as it moves through the negative space that's within the frame. Okay, I'm gonna have a drink of tea. And if anybody has a question, now would be a good time to ask it, or Sylvia and I are gonna dive into the next part of the conversation. Oh, I did want to show this too. Oh, actually, this is a good jumping off point.
It is. It's a good segue.
So for art in response to nature, Sylvia's going to read a passage from the most recent publication that just came out that relates to this. But I wanted to show, this was another piece that I made. Oh, here you can see, there you go. You can see the weaving better there. This was a wishbone shaped stick that I found the day that I arrived at the Sou'wester in my path in front of me. And so I just picked it up and took it with me on my walk. And then this was the first weaving that I made. So it was just really trying to be attuned to the quality of the space, the temperature, the time of the season, the colors, and there were two little stones that were next to this stick when I picked it up. So I recreated those with these two little black dots. Cool. Yeah. And so this is like, what is this? It's not, this is really about like, this is like a held memory.
Yeah, it's a moment captured, especially with the stones.
In that space, from that time, from that experience, that then having it like tactile in this way is to me like a really good way of holding on to that memory of that experience.
Very cool. So beautiful. I'd love to see a whole series of woven sticks.
Yeah, I know. It now makes me think like, I wish I could go back to every residency I've done and get a stick and do a week. I don't know. I guess I could like revisit the locations, just like grab sneak on
bundles of sticks in your purse and run.
I mean that, yeah, like when I was at Subtle Lodge, I did bring home a bag of just horsetail sticks, like broken dried horsetail. So that was, I guess, gathering sticks and rocks is, I think a lot of artists do that.
Definitely.
Okay, so we're gonna now have this kind of thematic conversation. Will you introduce the book that you just published and then read the
absolutely. So I just yesterday released my latest book, which is called Living Land, Sacred Space: An Approach to the Witch's Circle. And in witchcraft and just folk magic in general, circle casting is a common practice that it's a very simple way of establishing sacred space, whether indoors or outdoors in landscape. Because my writing emphasis is on outdoor magical practice, it's heavily involved with just reciprocal relation with landscape and conversation with landscape, which is why it's so perfect that we're talking about this today. But I thought it was, I'm going to read a very abridged part of the introduction, just the first and last paragraph, to give sort of like, to establish what we mean by sacred space and sacred, especially when it comes to spirituality in natural spaces. So the word sacred can be defined any number of ways. When considering spaces that are culturally regarded as sacred, such as temples and burial mounds, a simple definition surfaces: connected to spirit, indwelled with spirit, and in contact with spirit. Sacred space can be found growing wild in all landscapes or cultivated by choice in domesticated spaces like temples, shrines, and gardens. No matter where you live, you can find spirited places, a hiking trail, an unkempt park, a concrete lot overgrown with weeds. These wild lands that have been paved over deserve no less respect than they did as old-growth forests. These ever-spirited places have been disrespected and forgotten. Venerating these spaces and the spirits who indwell them is an opportunity to kindle a reciprocal relationship with the land you live upon. And the one thing I'll add about spirits is because the term spirit has a lot of different potential definitions among, ghosts and things like that. And when thinking in an animistic context, that's less important than it is to just see livingness in nature, and that you also partake of that livingness, and you are the landscape embodied as well. So that's like a major through line in this little book. But the one thing I'll say about circle casting, since that's sort of a side topic, is just that the whole point of a circle being the shape that you establish when you're like about to do a ritual or whatever it is that it is sort of symbolically encapsulating the circle of the horizon around you, which is local to everyone. And you're sort of bringing the powers from those horizons, that circle that's around you, towards yourself and bringing them in, which like empowers the space of working.
What that makes me think about is, so when I was in Astoria, and there's the Confluence Project that has one of the sites is like right by where the mouth of the Columbia meets the Pacific, and there's the incredible stump that's there in like a grove of trees. And when I was there, there were 7 or 8 bald eagles just flying in a circle up and down above that. And it was just like, just gave me like so many goosebumps. And I kept like filming it, and it looked, there was no magic to the filming of it. So I finally just like put my phone away and just like hung out there. And it did really have that sense of sacredness. And I think the Columbia River is a very sacred space that has held very particular meaning to many groups of people, certainly the Native and Indigenous communities who have lived along it for time immemorial. But it being in an environment, so I'm thinking about like where the Columbia River is along the Dalles or in Portland, where you kind of stop seeing it, you stop noticing it as a river. It's just something that like you cross. And that being, I don't know, it's easy to like lose that quality of sacredness in how you're experiencing the river as part of your just regular daily life. And I feel like, at least for me, this project has made me more aware at like, just kind of like maybe like an existential level, that it's there, like this incredible force is there so near to where I am right now all the time. And especially being so close. So we're in St. John's right now, so there's the confluence of the Willamette and the Columbia, so on a peninsula. And the idea of like not being that close to a river is really unsettling to me. I think it actually would probably be a good experience to be away, to just then have the contrast of that.
Yeah, definitely.
To really like, rather than know by just appreciating it, like know by going without it.
That's really interesting. The thing you mentioned about how many people drive along the Columbia, obviously seeing that it's a river, but not really like relishing in the fact that it's a river and what that means and what that feels like, and how all you need to do, like you said with the bald eagles, is put your phone down and just be there and experience it and saturate yourself in it and let it overtake all your senses. And that's all you need to do to recognize the sacred, really anywhere where wild things are growing. Like I mentioned in the book introduction, I live in an area where there's lots of unkempt lots and fields and weeds growing out of cracks in the pavement. And I think there's a lot of power, personal power or empowerment, I suppose, to be found in being able to saturate yourself in those environments and find what is sacred and alive about them. I don't remember what else you said that reminded me of this, but also obviously art making and ritual performance are very, very enmeshed. And in my opinion, as a ritual practitioner, ritual is just performance art, and it's performance art that is devoted to the landscape that I'm working in. So if I'm going to like a field to do a magic ritual or whatever, it's for that place. And so you don't want to, and that's sort of a good rule of thumb to follow when you're like going into a space, whether it's, you know, to actually do a ritual or to meet with a group of people to talk about landscape or to make art together, or to create a mandala out of sticks on the ground, just whatever it is that you want to do. Thinking of it in terms of a gift to the land, I think there's a lot of power and potency in that as well. And it's another way of kind of participating in the sacredness of spaces.
I'm curious, like how, because like I know that for your creative practice, like writing and ritual making is part of it, but also drawing is part of it. And so how, what is the relationship between how you come to draw the things that you draw? And I think, would you hold up a couple of illustrations?
So yeah, the cover art is a landscape drawing I did in the place where we tend to do our rituals. Speaking of stumps, I have a Douglas fir round drawn in this one as well. And let's see, I guess just because it's another good example of a circle, I also have this sun with orbiting planets around it. That's a great question. So yeah, of course, most of my artistic inspiration comes originally from going into landscape, immersing myself in the sacred, maybe doing a ritual or some sort of ritual act in landscape, and then coming home, having brought those things with me, kind of the way, like, this is such a good example of like bringing an experience home with you. So like maybe I'll find natural items and take them with me or whatever, but it has to do, I think, a lot about generativity in magic and art making, which I see again as sort of going hand in hand, and how I usually begin in landscape and doing acts of meditation and immersion. It's hard to not find something artistically inspiring. I will say it's there's an overabundance of it, and it's more about quieting yourself to find those things rather than being like, I think that's this, I think that's this. Just like absorbing is a really important part of that process for me. But I find that when I'm crafting sacred space and it's inspiring ritual actions, that inspires further art making, and that art making tends to feed right back into my magical or spiritual practice. So there's something about it being self-generating and self-perpetuating that reminds me of nature. And so I try to align my process to, I don't know, relentless self-generation in a sort of way. So that comes down to things like sketching and sketching and sketching. One of my favorite practices actually is taking a sketchbook out into landscape, sitting for a long time, and just, what's amazing is that if you stay still in landscape, you slowly see how, like, that everything's in motion around you, even if you thought it was still. Like, if you get still, you'll see everything moving. And so I like to do little things like, I'll see a bird in the sky and I'll put my pen on paper, and I'll not look at the paper and watch the bird fly, and then draw the shape that the bird, like draw the path that the bird flies in the sky. And then I just end up with a strange line that a strange form that I can do something interesting with in stitching or illustration. So, I mean, it seems kind of cliche to just say that like nature just is inspirational in general, but I think that the biggest skill that feeds into my art making is absorbing while I'm there.
I think, like, for me, I have a little bit of a different experience in the sense that I think the speed at which the rest of life is lived in is very fast. And art making, especially if I'm doing it in nature, is a way to actually occupy my mind and hands enough that I'm able to slow down and be in this space and actually be receptive to the natural environment. And also just like getting away from home, which I'm not great at doing. At like total homebodies. So it is like the language to make sense of one's experience in the world, or I should say my experience in the world. How are we doing, Tara? We're having a fine time over here, but questions?
No questions. I'm just, I'm enjoying it, and I've actually, like, what speaks to me is that stillness and being able to really understand, like, just, the life process, and that there is art and inspiration and everything. And I love the stick. I think the stick is awesome. I want a stick like that. I want to make something like that.
I will bring the stick to so in addition to when my piece is displayed at the library, which will be going in on July 8th, is that right? I think that's right.
July 8th.
There'll also be a display case that will have some of the reading materials that have informed this whole 1.5-year long experience, the materials that I've worked with, and then other kind of inspirational elements. And I will definitely be sure to bring the stick with me. It seems to have resonated with a lot of people, so there's something there.
And there's something speaking sort of magically as well, and in the sense of if sacred refers to spirited, you have quite literally captured the spirit of the moment you found it with the stones and what that meant to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, if you're thinking of it in like a folk magic context, this has all the powers of that moment in it still. And it's something that, like, you can hold and meditate on, and you can re-access that moment in a sort of a new iteration.
Mm-hmm. I have a terrible memory, and so I do think that having objects that were made at a very particular time and place, it helps me stay attached to memory and experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to look at my notes and see if there was anything else that
missed.
Yeah. Well, I guess. So I brought forward two things that were in the last conversation, the idea of being in dialogue with the natural world. And then the other one is kind of figuring out, when you're making the piece, what is the story or experience that's resonating. And I guess I maybe want to just return to this idea. One thing I'm noticing actually just now is that when I made this color palette, I wasn't at all thinking about composition, but actually, like, the design. The design of my piece is actually the same composition as those rectangles lined up like a spine or a skeleton. And I didn't actually A, mean to do that, or B, like, know that I did it until just now. And also that the way that this background paper is acting like the patchwork, and this is acting like the applique shapes, is like very much so mirrored in. Oh, she's gonna go like this. Mirrored in how this turned out. So that is, I love that, like, felicity and synchronicity of seeing those connections where, like, I don't know, I was really only thinking about color with that palette, but then somehow I was also thinking about this idea of segmentation, which I do want to acknowledge is also, having read about the impact of all of the dams on the Columbia River, is also about that. So it's kind of all of these things at the same time. I do love the idea too of the spine of a fish, the spine of a landscape, the way that a river becomes like this dividing line. And so it's kind of all of those things at the same time, and some of them are like really beautiful and resonant, and some of them are pretty troubling.
Do you how do you go, I don't know, maybe it's different for every project, but how do you go about picking your colors? Is it like a non-verbal feeling trusting thing, or like what's that like?
It's a combination of those things. I mean, I show them in that. Well, I'm going to grab them now. The rocks that I gathered from, which I'm returning, and I promise.
Oh, you're bringing the rocks back?
Yes, I can't keep them, but they've been on the shelf this whole year.
We're all magpies.
And so there, these, wonderful smooth river stones. This one is so good with the speckles. And then this one has stripes on it.
And then did these come from the Columbia River?
Yeah, these came from the banks of the Columbia. So that, and then the photographs that I took that captured, I mean, what I was really struck by is how, like, little blue there is. Like, unless you're there on a day where the sky is really vibrant blue, which it can be, they're really, I mean, I don't know why I was struck by that. Like, we have this idea of river as blue, like, in our minds. And it, like, was not blue anywhere. There was no blue anywhere except for the one day that I was driving along the river where it was like a very blue sky.
Right.
So I did want to have those like beats of unnatural
Yeah.
blue in an otherwise really pretty representative, like murky natural color palette. But it took also doing the color studies with the weavings that I did to get to this place. So it's very iterative.
Yeah.
And I would say that the palette for this project is similar to other palettes in other pieces that I've made. But this whole like bright blue situation is definitely new for me.
It's a beautiful palette.
Yeah, I'm pretty, and I'm loving the high contrast. What I don't know yet, and I won't know until I actually get it made, is as I move into the ones with the darker backgrounds, if I'm actually going to go all the way up to like a pale gray, if the contrast will be greater with that. So I have my work cut out for me. I have a lot still to do, but I've made so many of the decisions that it's really moving into execution and all of the handwork, which I will also be asking my daughter and my mother to help me with naturally.
Yep.
I think that was, I don't know, is there anything else that you wanted to add about?
No, I mean, I think we sort of touched on everything. I just personally resonate strongly with the idea of call and response art making when it comes to relating with landscape, like the fact that you took these stones from the river and they brought you inspiration for your colors, and then you're returning the stones to the river and you got something out of it without having to keep the stones. And so there's this, not that there's anything wrong with keeping things, but I think there's something really powerful about that, about like you've taken these stones and in a sense you have infused them with your own magic intention with your art making, and now that intention gets to be brought back to the river, and that's sort of a gift. Not to mention this whole thing is a gift to the river in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think that that's really, really cool. That's all I can think of.
Yeah. I would just, I guess, add a couple of things. One is that I do hope that folks will come out and see the piece as installed in the library. It's going in a beautiful location in a beautiful library, and you'll be able to walk all the way around it and really get up close. And it'll be there for the month of July. So I'll be installing it before the library opens on July 8th that morning. So it'll Saturday, July 8th. And so it'll be there, and I'll be there in the morning for a couple of hours after the library opens to answer questions. I'll probably have some stitching with me. And then there'll also be that display case that you'll be able to see. And then finally, the big to do. Oh, then this actually does make me think of something. So the big to do at Maryhill is on August 6th, where all of the artists and all of their pieces will be finally installed. I know that something that a couple of the other artists, I had the good fortune to have Chloe Height, who's another one of the artists, over for a studio visit. And then I also, Ofer, who's doing one of the other sections, was out at the Southwestern Arts Week. And so she and I got to meet and talk about our pieces. And we're all taking very different approaches, and I have no idea how those are going to land, and was very cagey about what I said about mine. But the idea of like, what are you doing to protect your piece from the outside world for that month that it's outside at Maryhill? And I have really landed on that I'm doing nothing, that everything that I thought of integrated something unnatural into my process. And well, I guess I shouldn't say I'm doing nothing. I am going to do quite a lot of like tying, so like quilting, but well, actually it's really like seed stitch, but scattered across the surface. And the purpose of that is to just make sure that my layers are connected in lots and lots of places.
Gotcha.
So if there is torrential rain, like the layers aren't going to separate. She'll get real soggy, but the layers won't separate.
That is so cool. I think I was hoping actually that you would say that like you're kind of going to let the landscape naturally weather the piece. And I think that will add so much to it in a way.
Yeah. And I mean, the clay will be fine. I will use, I will like wax the cord that I use for
you don't want it to
the
fall.
attachments.
Yeah, of course.
But I think that the way that it's designed, it's kind of like a kite or a sail. So there is tension to it, but it also is very light. And that I think I mean, we won't know, right? It'll be, but that's kind of where I've landed, is to be really hands off about additional engineering to offset that impact.
Very cool.
I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about today. What about you, Tara? Do you have any questions?
Nope, no questions, just excited to see it in the library. And then I'm really happy that I live so close to the Maryhill Museum. So throughout the month that it's down there, I can just mosey on down the grade and see what the weather is actually doing to the completed artwork of all of the artists' work put together.
Yeah.
So I'll send you a picture.
All right, well, thank you to everyone who is viewing today and to those who watch after the fact. I have a couple of, if you're like, I want to make art that's in connection with nature, I have a couple of workshops that are coming up this summer at Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, which is another incredible organization that does really focus on like art making and ecological practices. And I have one in July that is 2 days of stitching in response to the summer. And then I have in September a really great 2-day porcelain pinch pot class that's called To Spring from the Hand, elemental porcelain pinch pots. And it really, you don't even have to care about working with clay. It's about being embodied, being in your body, in the natural world, and like expressing that through the creation of an object. And it's really fun. And I know there's still spots in that one. I think there's just a couple spots in the stitching one in July. So you can check out Sitka Center, their website for those. You can also find them on my Instagram, which is at Carolyn Hazel Drake. And you can find Sylvia and her latest publication on her Instagram.
Leodrune Witchcraft. Yep.
Okay. Yes, and at the library, just a little bit of a tie-in on June 11th, we will have a yarn bomb in front of our library. We've had a lot of great donations from our knit and crochet challenge. So if you're able to, through the month of June, come down and see the yarn bomb in front of our library. And then, of course, hopefully I'll see you in July as you come and see Carolyn's artwork. So, yeah. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.